Good evening. If yesterday was the day American democracy died, today is the day the world caught fire. We warned you, we told you that a vacuum of power in Washington, D.C. It does not stay empty for long, it gets filled by the enemies of freedom. And tonight, as the United States government remains locked in a fratricidal death spiral, with no vice president, a paralyzed cabinet, and an isolated president, the consequences have arrived. They have arrived with the screech of cruise missiles and the rumble of T-90 tanks rolling across borders that were supposed to be inviolable. At approximately 3:00 a.m. Eastern European time, while Washington was still reeling from the resignation of JD Vance and the subsequent collapse of the executive branch, the Russian Federation initiated what intelligence analysts are calling Operation Sovereign Horizon. This is not a skirmish. This is not a drill. This is a full-scale, multi-front offensive that has shattered the peace of Europe. But the most terrifying part of this story isn't the explosions rocking Tallinn or the cyber blackouts in Warsaw. The most terrifying part is the silence coming from Pennsylvania Avenue. For the first time since 1945, a major European war has begun, and the United States has not picked up the phone. Reports from the ground indicate that Russian mechanized infantry divisions have crossed the Narva River into Estonia. Simultaneously, amphibious landings have been reported on the coastline of the Baltic states. The Suwalki Gap, that tiny, critical corridor connecting Poland to Lithuania, is currently under heavy artillery barrage from Kaliningrad. Vladimir Putin looked at the chaos in the Oval Office. He looked at the empty chairs in the Situation Room, and he made a calculation. He bet that America is too broken to stop him. And so far, he is right. In any normal administration, the president would be in the Situation Room right now. The vice president would be working the phones with NATO allies. The Secretary of State would be issuing ultimatums. But we don't have a normal administration. We have a ghost ship. Remember, the Secretary of State resigned yesterday. The Vice President is in hiding. The President is reportedly barricaded in the residence, consumed by paranoia about a domestic coup. There is nobody to give the order. There is nobody to rally the alliance. We are receiving reports from Pentagon sources, mid-level officers who are watching this nightmare unfold on their monitors, that the red phone, the direct hotline between Moscow and Washington, rang for 20 minutes this morning. Nobody answered. Let that image burn into your mind. The Russians called, perhaps to give a final warning, perhaps to mock us, and the receiver just rang in an empty room because the people whose job it is to answer are gone. This paralysis is compounded by the intelligence blackout we discussed in our last broadcast. Remember the Stone Ghost Network, the top-secret intelligence sharing mainframe used by the Five Eyes Alliance. The UK and Canada locked the US out of that system 24 hours ago due to the scandal surrounding Vance and the sanctions evasion. That decision, which seemed bureaucratic yesterday, is fatal today. We are hearing that the U.S. military command in Europe, EUCOM, is effectively flying blind. They are not receiving the real-time satellite feeds from British or Canadian assets. They are relying on their own degrading sensor arrays. A colonel at Ramstein Air Base in Germany leaked a message to us just moments ago. It reads simply, "We see the flashes on the horizon. We are hailing the White House for rules of engagement. We are getting a busy signal. A busy signal." The greatest military machine in human history has been rendered impotent not by enemy fire, but by political incompetence. The chain of command has snapped. The Russian offensive is tailored specifically to exploit this confusion. They are using gray zone tactics mixed with overwhelming force. They are broadcasting messages into the Baltic states saying, "America has abandoned you. The Trump administration has collapsed. Surrender and you will be spared." And the tragedy is, the people of Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania are looking at their televisions. They are seeing the riots in D.C., the empty podiums at the State Department, and they are starting to believe it. Why wouldn't they? If you were in Tallinn right now, watching Russian tanks line up on the border, and you look to the west for salvation, what would you see? You would see a U.S. president tweeting about rhino traders while his own government dissolves. You would see a Congress trying to figure out who is technically the president. You would see a superpower actively eating itself alive. The speed of the Russian advance suggests this was pre-planned, waiting for a trigger event. JD Vance's resignation was that trigger. It was the signal flare that the American government had ceased to function as a rational actor. Putin knows that Article 5 of the NATO treaty, an attack on one is an attack on all, is only as good as the political will to enforce it. A piece of paper cannot stop a tank. Only a Tomahawk missile can stop a tank. And the man with the keys to the Tomahawks is currently at war with his own vice president. We also have to talk about the cyber dimension. Concurrent with the physical invasion, a massive cyber attack has hit Western infrastructure. But curiously, it has barely touched the United States. It has hammered London, Berlin, Paris, and Warsaw. Power grids in Poland are flickering. Banking systems in Germany are down. It is a targeted strike designed to isolate Europe from America. It is a message. This is a European problem. Stay out of it, America, and you won't get hurt. It is a bribe. Putin is betting that the American public, distracted by the constitutional crisis and the economic crash at home, will look at a war in Europe and say, not our problem. He is banking on the isolationist instincts of the MAGA movement, the very movement that is currently imploding. But the silence from the White House is the loudest noise in the world right now. We have reached out to the White House press office. The email bounced back. The account has been deactivated. We reached out to the Department of Defense Public Affairs desk. No answer. Government has effectively gone dark during the start of World War II. Think about the timeline. 48 hours ago, we were a superpower. Today, we are a bystander. The speed of this collapse is unprecedented in the history of empires. Usually, empires fade away over decades. We have dismantled our global standing in a weekend. And where are the aircraft carriers? The USS Gerald R. Ford is currently in the Mediterranean. By all logic, it should be steaming full speed toward the Baltic Sea. But open-source tracking data shows it holding a stationary pattern off the coast of Italy. Why? Because the captain of that ship needs an order to move into a combat zone. That order comes from the Secretary of Defense or the President. The Secretary of Defense resigned. The President isn't speaking to the military. So the most powerful warship on Earth is floating in circles, useless, while our allies burn. This is the nightmare scenario that every Cold War strategist feared. Not that we would lose a war, but that we wouldn't show up for it. The deterrence of the United States relied on the certainty of our response. That certainty is gone. It vanished the moment Vance boarded that plane and the cabinet walked out. As we move to the next part of this broadcast, we need to shift our focus from the silence in Washington to the panic in Brussels. Because if Washington is a ghost town, NATO headquarters is a burning building. The alliance that kept the peace for 75 years is facing its death knell tonight. They are hitting the panic button, and the wire is cut. If the silence in Washington is deafening, the noise in Brussels is a scream of existential terror. We are shifting our focus now to NATO headquarters, the sprawling complex in Belgium that serves as the brain of the Western military alliance. For 7 decades, this building has stood on a foundation of one absolute truth: the United States will come. Today, that foundation has liquefied. Sources inside the North Atlantic Council, the governing body of NATO, describe a scene of absolute chaos that rivals the fall of Rome. At 4:00 a.m., the ambassadors of Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, and Poland formally invoked Article 4, consultation on a threat, and immediately pivoted to invoke Article 5. This is the all-for-one clause. It is the nuclear option. It has only been invoked once in history, after 9/11, when Europe came to the aid of America. Now, Europe is calling for America to return the favor. But here is the tragedy unfolding in real time. To activate the full military might of NATO, you need a unanimous vote, or at least a consensus that includes the primary military power. You need the United States to say yes. According to diplomatic cables leaked to us minutes ago, the NATO Secretary General desperately tried to get the U.S. ambassador to NATO on the secure line. But there is no U.S. ambassador to NATO. The previous ambassador resigned in protest 2 months ago, and his replacement was never confirmed by the Senate due to the partisan deadlock we discussed earlier. The post is held by a low-level chargé d'affaires, a career bureaucrat who is reportedly sitting in the meeting room weeping with a cell phone in one hand and a secure heavy-duty receiver in the other, unable to get anyone of rank on the line in D.C. Witnesses say the Polish ambassador actually grabbed the American representative by the lapels of his suit, screaming, "Where are they? Where is the cavalry?" The American official could only whisper, "I don't know, I can't find them." This is the end of the Atlantic Alliance. It isn't ending with a treaty signing. It is ending with a busy signal. Without the United States, NATO is a hollow shell. Yes, the British and French have nuclear weapons. Yes, the Germans have tanks. But the logistics, the intelligence, the airlift capacity, the command and control, that is all American. Without the U.S. backbone, the European armies are fragmented and uncoordinated. And Russia knows this. The panic has spread to the civilian populations. We are seeing images from Warsaw, Berlin, and Paris. This isn't just a political crisis. It's a refugee crisis in the making. Train stations in Warsaw are overflowing with people trying to head west away from the Russian border. But where do they go? The entire continent feels unsafe because the security umbrella has collapsed. In the absence of American leadership, we are seeing the fracturing of Europe. The French president has reportedly called an emergency meeting of European nuclear powers, excluding the U.S., to discuss a continental defense strategy. This is effectively a declaration that NATO is dead. The French are preparing to defend France, not Estonia. The Germans are debating whether to negotiate a separate peace with Moscow to keep the gas flowing. The unity of the West is shattering into 30 separate pieces. Let's go back to the ghost phone. We have learned that the Supreme Allied Commander Europe, a CCUR, usually an American general, is currently General Christopher Cavalli. He is a serious man, a patriot. He is currently in Mons, Belgium. By law, he answers to the U.S. president, but by treaty, he answers to the North Atlantic Council. He is currently facing the most impossible choice in military history. The Council is telling him to mobilize the Rapid Reaction Force, but the White House has not authorized the movement of U.S. troops. If General Cavalli moves the American troops stationed in Germany to the Polish border without a presidential order, he is committing mutiny. He could be court-martialed for treason. But if he doesn't move them, he is watching the alliance he swore to protect burn to the ground. Sources close to the general say he has been trying to reach the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, General Brown, for hours. The two generals are reportedly communicating on an encrypted back channel, essentially conspiring to save the alliance without the president's knowledge. They are discussing a training exercise, loophole, moving troops under the guise of a drill to get them into the fight. But this is dangerous. If Trump finds out his generals are waging a war he didn't authorize amidst his paranoia about a coup, the consequences could be civil war within the U.S. military. Meanwhile, the rhetoric from Moscow is chillingly precise. The Russian foreign minister just held a press conference. He didn't even mention the United States. He spoke only to our European partners. He said the era of Atlantic dominance is over. The hegemon has collapsed under the weight of its own corruption. We are merely restoring the historical security buffer of Mother Russia. Do not interfere and you will survive. He is treating the United States like a fallen empire. Like Rome in 476 AD, he is assuming we are already gone, and in the U.S. State Department, the Foggy Bottom headquarters in D.C., it is a scene of despair. Career diplomats, people who have spent 30 years building these alliances, are shredding documents. They know that if the U.S. fails to honor Article 5 today, no country will ever trust an American treaty again. South Korea, Japan, Israel, Australia, they are all watching. They are realizing that their security guarantees are worthless. If the U.S. doesn't fight for Estonia, it won't fight for Taiwan, it won't fight for Tel Aviv. The global order is dissolving. We are also hearing reports that the British Prime Minister and the Canadian Prime Minister are trying to bypass the White House entirely. They are calling governors. Yes, you heard that right. The Prime Minister of the UK reportedly called the Governor of New York and the Governor of California, asking if they can use their National Guard units or influence their congressional delegations. Foreign leaders are treating U.S. states as sovereign entities because the federal government has checked out. This is the level of disintegration we are dealing with. The world looks at the map of America and sees a black hole, and amidst this, the brave soldiers of the Baltic states are fighting alone. We are seeing footage on social media before the internet is cut of Estonian infantry firing javelins at Russian columns. Those javelins were made in America. They were paid for by American taxpayers. But the country that sent them is nowhere to be found. The NATO Charter says, an armed attack against one shall be considered an attack against them all. Those words were written in blood after World War II to prevent exactly what is happening tonight. They were the holy scripture of Western democracy. Tonight, Donald Trump and the chaos of his administration are feeding that scripture into the shredder. Brussels is crying out. The phone is ringing in the Oval Office, and nobody is picking it up, but while the politicians hide, the soldiers are left in the cold. In our next segment, we are going to go deep inside the Pentagon, where the most powerful military officers in the world are sitting in a dark room, locked out of their own intelligence networks, trying to decide whether to disobey their president or let the world end. We take you now inside the Pentagon, the five-sided fortress in Arlington, Virginia, that projects American power to every corner of the globe. Usually, this building is the most informed place on Earth. It sees everything, it hears everything. But tonight, the Pentagon is blind, deaf, and mute. As we reported earlier, the Five Eyes Intelligence Sharing Agreement, the compact between the US, UK, Canada, Australia, and New Zealand, has been severed. But we need to explain what that actually means on the ground, because it is the reason why Russian tanks are rolling unchecked. The Stone Ghost network is not just a database. It is a live nervous system. It integrates signals intelligence from British listening posts in Cyprus, Canadian satellite arrays in the Arctic, and Australian naval sensors in the Pacific. It feeds all that data into a single cohesive picture of the battlefield. For decades, U.S. generals have relied on this composite picture to make split-second decisions. When the UK and Canada pulled the plug yesterday to protect their data from the compromised Trump administration, the screens in the National Military Command Centers, NMCC, didn't just flicker. They froze. Entire sectors of the Russian front went dark. We have spoken to a senior intelligence analyst who walked out of the Pentagon an hour ago. He described the scene in the tank, the secure conference room of the Joint Chiefs. He said, "It was like someone turned off the lights in the middle of a knife fight. The U.S. military is currently relying solely on its own organic assets." But here is the problem. U.S. satellites were repositioned last week to focus on the domestic unrest and the border. Per Trump's orders, we have blind spots over Eastern Europe. And usually, the British fill those gaps. Today, the British aren't sharing. So you have General Charles Q. Brown, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, staring at a map that is 50% incomplete. He sees the Russian movements, but he doesn't know their strength. He doesn't know their nuclear readiness posture. He is flying blind into a hurricane. And he is doing it while the commander-in-chief is effectively LOL. This brings us to the most dangerous dynamic of the night, the dilemma of the generals. The U.S. military is sworn to obey the orders of the president, but they are also sworn to defend the Constitution. What happens when the president is silent? The Constitution is being violated by a foreign power and the chain of command is broken. We are hearing rumors of a soft mutiny brewing on the E-ring of the Pentagon. The generals are huddling. They are debating the legality of acting without a presidential directive. If they order U.S. aircraft in Germany to scramble and intercept Russian bombers, they are technically starting a war without political authorization. That is a coup. That is the military seizing the power of the state. But if they sit on their hands, they are complicit in the destruction of the Western world. General Brown has reportedly issued a stand-fast order to all global commands. This means don't move, don't shoot, but don't retreat. It is a holding pattern. It is the military equivalent of holding your breath. But you can't hold your breath when the enemy is punching you in the gut. The Russians know we are blind. This is the Maskirovka doctrine deception. Russian electronic warfare units are flooding the airwaves with fake signals. Because we don't have the British cross verification, our systems are lighting up with phantom fleets and ghost missiles. The radar operators can't tell what is real and what is a glitch. There was a terrifying moment 2 hours ago, confirmed by 3 separate sources, where NORAD systems falsely indicated a limited nuclear launch from the Arctic. In a normal world, we would cross-check this with Canadian data instantly, but the Canadians aren't talking to us. For 6 agonizing minutes, the U.S. nuclear forces went to DEFCON 2. Bombers started their engines. Missile keys were inserted. It turned out to be a Russian cyber spoof designed to test our reflexes. We failed the test. We almost launched Armageddon because we couldn't call our friends in Ottawa to ask, "Do you see this too?" That is how close we are. We are walking along the cliff edge in a blindfold. And where is the Secretary of Defense? He resigned. His deputy secretary resigned. The acting authority is currently a mid-level undersecretary for policy who was a Trump loyalist appointee with 0 military experience. Reports say he is currently locked in his office, refusing to sign any deployment orders because he is terrified of being sued or prosecuted by the incoming administration, whoever that turns out to be. The bureaucracy of fear has paralyzed the machine of war. Meanwhile, the psychological operations are ramping up. Russian bots are flooding formerly Twitter, now X, and Truth Social. They are pushing a narrative that the deep state faked the invasion to stop Trump. They are saying the videos of tanks in Estonia are AI generated. And because the White House isn't refuting it, millions of Americans believe it. The soldiers in the barracks are checking their phones. They are seeing their own president post conspiracy theories while their NATO allies scream for help. Morale is collapsing. We have reports of fistfights breaking out on U.S. bases between soldiers who support the America First isolationism and soldiers who believe in the oath to allies. The U.S. military is fracturing from the inside at the exact moment it is needed most. General Brown knows he has to make a decision before the sun rises in D.C. He can either follow the protocol and watch Europe fall, or he can break the chain of command, effectively end the Trump presidency, and order the U.S. military to fight. It is Caesar crossing the Rubicon. But this time, Caesar isn't doing it for power. He is doing it because Rome is burning and the emperor is playing the fiddle. The intelligence blackout is the final nail in the coffin of American hegemony. We spent trillions of dollars on stealth fighters and aircraft carriers. But we forgot that the most important weapon is trust. We lost the trust of our allies, so they turned off the lights. Now we are alone in the dark with a loaded gun, and we don't know where to point it. In the next segment, we will look at the domestic reaction. How is the U.S. Congress reacting to a world war while the Capitol building is under siege? And what is the shadow government led by the former vice president trying to do to save us? While the skies over Europe turn gray with smoke, the air in Washington, D.C. is thick with poison. We turn our gaze now to the domestic political scene, which has devolved from a constitutional crisis into a chaotic brawl over the steering wheel of a car plunging off a cliff. The reaction from Capitol Hill to the Russian invasion has been catastrophic. The United States Congress, the body that formally has the power to declare war, is currently physically unable to convene. As we reported earlier, the Speaker of the House has declared himself the acting president in a shadow ceremony. But the legitimacy of that claim is being contested by the MAGA caucus, who are currently occupying the House floor in a sit-in chanting "No war for globalists." You have a situation where half of the government is trying to issue a declaration of war against Russia, and the other half is cheering Russia on. Representative Marjorie Taylor Greene posted minutes ago, "Putin is protecting his borders just like we should. No American blood for Estonia." This sentiment is echoing through the Freedom Caucus. They are viewing the Russian offensive not as an act of aggression, but as a validation of Trump's worldview, that NATO is a scam and Europe is a leech. Contrast this with the Senate. The survivalist Republicans, we mentioned, the ones who broke with Trump after Vance's resignation, are frantic. Senators Romney, Collins, and Murkowski have joined with the Democratic leadership to draft a joint resolution of defense. They are trying to pass a law that legally compels the military to act by passing the president. This is unprecedented legal territory. Can Congress command the military directly if the president is incapacitated by insanity or inaction? The Constitution says the president is commander-in-chief. But the Constitution is not a suicide pact. The lawyers are arguing in the basement of the Capitol while the tanks roll. And then there is Donald Trump. The president broke his silence an hour ago. He didn't address the nation from the Oval Office. He didn't call a press conference. He called into a right-wing talk radio show. His voice sounded tired, raspy, and completely detached from reality. When asked about the Russian invasion, he said, "It's a fake. It's all green screens. The lying media wants to start World War III to stop me from fixing the economy. I have a great relationship with Putin. He wouldn't do this to me. He's doing it to the deep state. He is denying the war exists." This is the moment the timeline splits. You have the President of the United States telling his followers that the burning cities of Europe are a hoax. This creates a cognitive dissonance in the American population that is paralyzing. Half the country thinks we are at war. The other half thinks it's a movie. This denial puts the shadow government in a desperate position. We are receiving reports that former Vice President JD Vance, from his undisclosed location, has opened a direct line to the Kremlin. He is attempting to negotiate as if he were the head of state. He is reportedly telling Russian diplomats, "The president is unwell. The American people do not want this. Pull back and we can discuss terms." But why would Putin listen to an exile? Vance has no army. He has no authority. He is just a man with a phone. The Russians are likely recording these calls to release them later, to further humiliate the U.S. by showing that our government is fractured into warring tribes. The economic impact of this domestic split is instantaneous. The New York Stock Exchange has announced it will not open tomorrow. The futures markets have flatlined. The U.S. dollar is being dumped globally. If the U.S. cannot defend Europe, the dollar is no longer the world's reserve currency. The petrodollar died tonight. We are looking at hyperinflation hitting the American consumer within days. A loaf of bread could cost $50 by next week because the faith and credit of the United States has been exposed as a fraud. We are also seeing the governors making their moves. The governor of California has issued a statement saying, if the federal government will not honor our treaty obligations, California will independently sanction the Russian Federation. We are seeing the balkanization of U.S. foreign policy. States are acting like countries because the country is acting like a failed state. And in the streets of D.C., the two tribes are clashing. Pro-Trump groups are marching with signs saying peace with Russia, clashing with pro-Ukraine NATO demonstrators waving American flags. The National Guard is caught in the middle. The violence is escalating. We have reports of gunfire near the Naval Observatory. The world is watching this. The Chinese are watching this. They see a nation so consumed by its own hatred that it cannot see the knife at its throat. The Senate Foreign Relations Committee is trying to get the Secretary of State on the line, but remembering he resigned, they are trying to find anyone. They managed to get a Deputy Assistant Secretary on a video link. The poor man was sitting in a darkened office at the State Department. When asked what the U.S. policy is regarding the invasion, he laughed. He actually laughed. He said, "Senator, there is no U.S. policy, there is just noise. That is the epitaph of the superpower. Just noise." Trump's denial of the war essentially freezes the military. If the president says the war is fake, any general who fights it is defying the reality defined by the leader. It is a psychological trap. Trump has weaponized truth itself to protect his ego. He cannot admit the war is real because that would mean his friendship with Putin was a lie. So he would rather let Europe burn than admit he was played. The survivalist coalition in Congress is now discussing the 25th Amendment again, but with a new urgency. They are looking at the insanity clause. But without a vice president, they are stuck in the legal black hole we discussed. They are drafting a letter to General Brown, essentially giving him permission to ignore the president. They are writing a permission slip for a coup to save the world. But General Brown knows that if he accepts that permission, he destroys the republic to save the empire. It is a choice between the Constitution and the world. As we head into the final part of this broadcast, we have to look at the long-term consequences, because no matter what happens in the next 24 hours, the world we knew is gone. The American century ended at 3:00 a.m. this morning. What comes next? A dark age. We have reached the terminal point. The sun is setting on Washington, D.C., but for the Western world, it feels like the sun may never rise again. In this final segment, we must look beyond the immediate chaos of the invasion and the paralysis in the White House. We must look at the future that is being born in the ashes of this day. The Russian offensive is continuing. They have secured the Suwalki Gap. They have effectively cut off the Baltic states from the rest of NATO. In 12 hours, they have undone 30 years of post-Cold War security architecture. And they did it without the United States firing a single shot in return. This isn't just a military defeat. It is a philosophical death. The idea of the West as a political entity, a group of nations bound by shared values and mutual defense, is over. It died when the phone rang in the Oval Office and nobody answered. Across the globe, other predators are smelling blood. Intelligence reports from the Pacific indicate that the People's Liberation Army PLA of China has moved to its highest state of readiness. Amphibious assault ships are massing across the Taiwan Strait. Why wouldn't they? They have just seen proof that the American security guarantee is a mirage. If the U.S. won't fight for NATO, its blood brother, it certainly won't fight for Taiwan. Xi Jinping is looking at Taiwan and seeing a piece of fruit ready to fall from the tree. We are facing the prospect of a two-front global war, Europe and Asia, at a moment when the United States doesn't even have a functioning government. The refugee crisis in Europe is going to destabilize the continent for a generation. Millions of Eastern Europeans are streaming west. The economies of Germany and France will buckle under the strain. This will lead to the rise of far-right isolationist governments in Europe who will say, "America failed us. We need to look out for ourselves." The European Union will likely fracture. Every nation will build its own walls. The dream of a united, peaceful Europe is being crushed by Russian tanks and American incompetence. And what of the United States? Even if Donald Trump resigns tomorrow, even if JD Vance returns, even if the military restores order, the damage is permanent. The trust is gone. You cannot tape a mirror back together. No nation will ever again base its security on a promise from Washington. We have proven that our domestic insanity is more important to us than our international obligations. We are witnessing the birth of a multipolar world, a world of gangsters, a world where might makes right. Russia takes what it wants in Europe. China takes what it wants in Asia. And the United States retreats into a fortress of paranoia, fighting civil wars over culture while the world burns. The shadow government of JD Vance is issuing one final statement tonight. It reads, "God help us. We tried." It is a surrender note. It is an admission that the momentum of the collapse is too great to stop. The military is digging in. General Brown has ordered the U.S. borders to be sealed, not to keep immigrants out, but to keep the chaos in. We are turning inward. The aircraft carriers will likely be recalled to home ports to protect the homeland. We are becoming what we fought against in the 1930s, an isolated island letting the world descend into fascism. Historians will write about this day for 1,000 years. They will ask, how did the most powerful empire in history fall? Did it fall to barbarians at the gates? No. It fell because the people inside the gates started fighting each other and forgot to lock the door. The Russian flag is being raised over Narva tonight. Tomorrow it might be raised over Tallinn. Next week maybe Taipei. The Pax Americana is dead. As we sign off, the White House is dark. The lights are off in the press briefing room. The only light coming from the executive mansion is the flicker of a television set in the residence, where a lonely, angry old man watches the world end and convinces himself it's all a show. This is the news. It is the worst news of our lives. Good night and good luck. You are on your own now.